I'd like to do is introduce Jim Ewel, our speaker today. Jim is the CEO of InDemand Interpreting. They're a video remote interpreting company. Pretty cool technology if you have a chance to check it out on its website. Jim's been one of the earliest bloggers, podcasters, speakers, organizers. I met Jim like 3 years ago, I think. 2010.
2 to 3 years ago. I don't remember.
Around the Sprint 1 meeting with John. Anyways,
June of 2012.
So trying to get, we're looking for a speaker, and coincidentally Jim's got one of his colleagues works here in Boston, and it worked at the time and worked out great. So at this point, I'm going to sit down. I'm not going to be like NPR where they talk things to death. I'll sit down and let Jim take it on from here.
All right, thank you, Frank. So when Frank asked me to speak about this, I was thinking about a topic, and I chose this topic about how to create a world-class marketing team. And it's a little bit of an arrogant topic if you think about it. I mean, I will not claim that our current marketing team is world-class at the company we're at. I'm not even sure I've ever run a world-class marketing team. I do have some thoughts about what that might look like. And I would like this presentation to be kind of food for thought, okay? If you have questions as I go along, or even just comments as I go along, or challenges as I go along, you think I'm full of crap about something I've said, please speak up. I'd rather interact with you and never get through the slides, in doing it, okay? So a little bit about my background, not to talk too much about it, but just so you know where I'm coming from. I spent 12 years at Microsoft from '89 to 2001. Joined when it was relatively small, 2,000 or 3,000 people at the time. Spent 5 years in sales in the Chicago office and 7 years in marketing at corporate. I did a lot of the early Windows NT marketing. I ran SQL Server marketing for 3.5 years, and that was by far my favorite job there, and had a lot of fun doing that. And then my last year and a half, I was the VP of marketing for all of the server products at Microsoft. Took off about 20 months after that. Since then, I've kind of developed a career as what my wife calls an itinerant CEO. I come into expansion stage companies, and sometimes the founder has not done this before, and they need a professional CEO to take over and work with the founder, and sometimes keep them, sometimes not, as this happens. And so I'm on my third company doing that. Go Ahead Software, we sold to Oracle. Odometry, we sold a company called Click Forensics, and they actually do business as Odometry right now. And as Frank said, I'm with InDemand Interpreting right now. The reason, though, that I'm talking tonight is that in between Odometry and InDemand, for about 1.5 years, 2 years, I did some consulting, and I started blogging about the topic of Agile marketing, okay? I got into it as a result of, you talked earlier about, your rock star here, so Scott Brinker. If you've not read Scott Brinker's blog about Chief Marketing Technologist, do. It's great. He writes great stuff. Back in, I think it was 2010, okay, March 24th, 2010. He wrote a blog post called Ideas for an Agile Marketing Manifesto. And essentially, he took the development manifesto and said, how would we change this for marketing, right? And I immediately identified with this. I had done, my development team at Go Ahead had practiced Agile. I had experienced the problem of marketing not seeming to be as nimble, as predictable, as fast at getting things done as I thought we needed to be at times. And the idea that we could apply some of the project management methodologies, Scrum, Kanban, some other things, to marketing immediately just struck a chord with me. And at the time I was looking for something to blog about, and so I went out online, found that agilemarketing.net was available, and I started writing about that. I've created a little over 100 blog posts about Agile marketing, and I also started to consult about it. I've taken about 6 teams now through the course that I teach and through getting them to use Agile marketing. So I've seen a little bit about some things that work and don't work. I'll talk about some of that experience. I also had the pleasure of going to Sprint Zero in June of 2012, okay? John Cass helped organize that with me. We had, John,
35 marketers.
35 marketers,
Yeah.
okay?
The largest group of agile marketers in the world at the time.
At the time. And, you know, we met at the offices of MindJet in San Francisco, and we issued the Agile Marketing Manifesto. And unfortunately, we haven't met since then. We got to do something about that, John. But, you know, a lot of people were involved in that, and I certainly had a great time interacting with those people. So when Frank asked me to talk tonight, I was coming into town on business. I've got some business calls tomorrow. I was looking back at some of my blog posts, and I spotted one from about a year ago in which I talked about creating a world-class marketing team. And the inspiration for that was an article from some guys at eConsultancy, another blog that I highly recommend. They have some great stuff out there, all right? And one of the things that the CEO of eConsultancy had done is he had taken a look at what's called the software capability maturity model, okay? And he had applied that. He said, what would it look like if we applied that to marketing? So here we go again, stealing some of the ideas from the development team, right? So if you're not familiar with the software capability maturity model, it came out of the same concerns that spawned Agile. The concerns were that, you know, software wasn't being produced quickly enough, it wasn't predictable enough. It kind of went in a little different fork though, okay? Whereas Agile primarily became about speed, time to get something in front of someone so they could look at it and say, yes, that's what I wanted, or not, okay? And really getting things done quickly. The maturity model became much more about quality. It became much more about creating software that was of very high quality. It's also about productivity, but if I had to say the emphasis, it was slightly more about quality. It's essentially a ladder, and it starts out with what they call heroic efforts, which I love that particular phrase, okay? It's not to say that at level 1 you can't produce great software, you can. But you do it because you hire great software developers and they go through heroic efforts. The point is there's no process, there's no method, there's nothing that does that consistently with, you know, your average developers. That's really the point of the maturity model, okay? And then it goes up into managed, where you apply some basic project management, process standardization, measuring some of these things, and then into continuous process improvement. So I looked at that and I said, well, can we apply that to marketing, much the way the e-consultancy guys did. And I thought we could, but I thought it had to be a little bit different. And so that's what I'm going to talk about tonight, is a proposal for a marketing maturity model. Now there's a lot here, okay, for you to read, all right? What I'm going to do in the rest of this presentation is to drill down on each of these levels and to talk about some things that I see in terms of things like the vision and strategy, the working practices, the people, and the data and technology for each one of those, okay? So I'm going to kind of, just to go back a level, I'm going to kind of walk through this, all right? Just a little bit explain. Again, I think you can start out and still do great marketing just through heroic efforts, okay, if there's no process. The second stage is really about Agile as project management, and it refers to things you mentioned earlier, okay? Devin, is that right? So Devin mentioned earlier, people are getting things done, right? It's about that speed and getting things done, and it becomes a project management thing. 3 is about optimization and the importance of experimentation, and I'll talk about that and why I think that's such an important thing for marketing. 4 is not only about speed, but agility. And I'm using agility in the sense of responsiveness to change. It's a little different from speed. Speed is just getting a lot of things done. Agility is somewhat getting the right things done and trying to figure out, even when you're running 1,000 miles an hour, what's changed, and recognizing that something's changed in the environment, okay? And then the fifth is what I'm going to call remarkable customer experiences, okay? Which I think is a super important thing about marketing right now. So let me just kind of drill down on each one of those. Let me start with the heroic efforts. So first of all, I would say that I experienced this a lot at Microsoft, okay? One of the highlights of my career there was the launch of SQL Server 7, okay? We launched it at Comdex that year. We won not only Best of Comdex for our product category, but we also won it for the entire show, okay? We took that business from 90 million to 450 million. We did a lot of good things. The truth is, there's so much more that we could have done. And one of the struggles, and this is one of the reasons that I eventually left Microsoft, is that it was easier for a brand new program manager at Microsoft to get a feature into SQL Server than it was for me as the VP of Server Marketing. Honestly, that was true, okay? The day we launched SQL Server, and I remember this story very well, so I was kind of two in a box running the SQL Server business with the head of development, okay? And he came up to me and he said, "Great job, you guys didn't drop the disk." That's what he said to me. What he meant by that is that back then, you publish software with a CD, with a CD disk, okay? And he had come from digital where they felt like they'd created this great RDB database and marketing had just completely blown it. That was their view, okay? And so he was basically saying, our job is to create the thing, then we throw it over the wall to you, and you do your marketing magic, okay? And don't drop the disk. That was the attitude, okay? And I think that going back just a little bit, in stage one, the organizational strategy is generally determined elsewhere. Marketing supports, and sometimes even the tactics are dictated. So when I was going in and teaching some of these classes on Agile Marketing, I remember in particular this one organization, and I asked them, why do you do this? Why do you do this particular thing that's taking like 60% of your resources? And basically they told me because sales says they must do it. And even to the level of you're producing a 30-page, particular document and, here's what it is and all that sort of stuff. I said, who reads this thing? They said, really nobody reads it. Sales does, okay? But nobody reads it. So at this first level, even the tactics are dictated oftentimes, okay? Working practices, processes, and tools. So structures tend to be very siloed. They're using waterfall project management. Infrequent updates. A lot of times things will go for a long period of time, years, without being updated, okay? Hierarchical decision making, we used to talk about HIPPO, the highest paid person's opinion is the way things got decided, right? This was, quite frankly, my life at Microsoft. In order to make changes, I had to get Ballmer's approval for almost everything. One of the reasons I left. Still that way. Okay. Another thing, and you can read all of this, but one thing I want to just call attention to is, and I see a fair amount of teams doing this, and I'm a little bit being critical, but I do see this, and we all do it. Okay, we're marketers. We tell stories. And one of the things that we do, and I fell guilty to this at Microsoft, is you come into a meeting with executives, right? And you show them the metrics that tell the story that you want to tell, right? The story that makes you look good. Those I call vanity metrics, okay? They make you feel good. And by the way, this isn't just my term, okay? Eric Ries talks about this in the Lean Startup, all right? They're ones that you can say, look, here's the clear sign of vanity metric. When it goes up, everybody wants to say, it was because of this that I did, okay? When it goes down, nobody wants to own it. A lot of times it's things like hits or page views or traffic or, there are things that it's nice that it goes up. It doesn't relate necessarily to real business. It doesn't relate to revenue. It doesn't relate to things that actually cause conversions and things like that. So one of the things that I suggest people do is really, when they look at the metric, ask the question, so what? If this metric goes up, so what? What is that going to do to our revenue, to our conversions, to our whatever it is that we are primarily driving? Okay. Level 2, Agile is project management. Okay. In many cases, the organizational strategy is still determined elsewhere, but there's a key thing that's different. Marketing determines the priorities. And actually, this is kind of a big thing, right? So in the sprint planning session, one of the big things that marketing does in that session is to determine, we've got this amount of resource, what are we going to prioritize against the strategy, okay? It's a pretty powerful thing, actually. It's actually something that we as marketers love to do, okay? Working practices, sprints, Kanban, and/or Scrum. And I think it does result in a culture of execution and accountability for deliverables, okay? Yes?
When you say organizational strategy, could you just parse that a little bit? Because I'm thinking in my brain, is that marketing strategy when you say marketing determines the priorities? Distinct from, say, go-to-market strategy, distinct from the business strategy, Michael Porter-esque?
Yeah, so I think of it as, what is the strategy for getting customers and generating business, okay, generating revenue, okay? And many times what I see is that strategy is coming from senior management and or sales. That's not necessarily wrong. It's just that if marketing doesn't have a seat at that table,
right.
then I don't think you're getting to the highest levels of marketing. So I think marketing has to have a seat at that table to be in that discussion, and in fact a central role in that discussion. And it's about, the design of the product, it's about the whole customer experience. That's what I'm leading up to, because I think that's a very important part of the organizational strategy.
Your comment about deck is resonating in the background.
Yeah, I never worked there, but I've heard that from a lot of people. So, all right. Now, one thing I want to just warn as a danger about sort of level 2. I don't want to make it seem like level 2 is a small thing, because it is. It's a big thing. Okay, it really can make a difference in your marketing. But I have been working with a guy named Matt Hines, who also writes a great blog. I think his newsletter comes out on Saturdays, not to compete, but he's got a really nice sales newsletter. So I hired Matt to do some work for us, and I was introducing him to Agile Marketing, okay? And Matt's very smart, and he's also very politic. And we've been doing some things. We were getting a heck of a lot done, okay? And Matt makes this comment. We have to be careful we don't let all this great activity that we're getting done lull us into thinking that we're accomplishing our goals just because we're moving so much from the sprint column to the get it done column. And I think that's so true, okay? And it is something you have to be a little careful about as you adopt. And I've seen this as some of the teams that I've trained, okay? They love the fact that they're getting so much done. It's important. But you also have to figure out what are really the right things to get done. Okay? It's not just moving things from one column to the next. All right, level 3, optimizing. So again, you're getting into now strategy is, at the very least, it's tempered and adjusted by results and data, but it's also, it's real there. So I don't think I have a slide on this, but I tell the story sometimes about, I'm going to forget the guy's name. He wrote a book called The End of Marketing as We Know It. Sergio? No, not Sergio. Simon is his last name. Sergio Simon, is that his name? Okay. I did sort of remember. Coca-Cola, right? So the story goes that Sergio went in to meet his new CEO, Roberto Geisman, I think was the guy's name. And he said, as a matter of courtesy, he was going to show him the ads that they were currently running for Coke. And Roberto watched the ads and said, I don't like them. I hate those ads. Okay? And Simon said, well, respectfully, I don't care. Because unless you're going to buy $1 billion worth of Coke next quarter or whatever, I'm not selling to you, okay? I got to keep selling to those goddamn consumers. And I've got the data right here that says when we started running these ads, we got an 8% uptick in Coke consumption or whatever it was, okay? Sort of thing. It's kind of the point, right? I mean, strategy has to be tempered by some results. It's not just Roberto's, the CEO's opinion. I have to remember that sometimes, you know? It's also about the data. The working practices and processes and tools, I think, are the most important difference in this level of the capability marketing model, okay? Let me just talk a little bit about that. Anybody familiar with something called the Creber Prize? You ever heard of it? Well, you may have heard of who won it, okay? So in 1959, an industrialist named Henry Creber founded this prize for the first human-powered flight that could go around a course, I think it was half a mile between pylons, okay? And it had to start 10 feet above the ground, it had to do a figure-8 course around the pylons, and finish 10 feet above the ground. And it had to do all that human-powered flight, okay? So this is in 1959. 15 years go by. It's a big prize, by the way. It's 50,000 pounds, okay, which in 1959 is big money. Today it's 100,000, not quite $100,000, something like that. So a lot of money. 15 years goes by, nobody claims the prize, okay? Lots of teams try, they crash, something happens, all this stuff. In 1974 or so, a guy by the name Paul McCready came along, and he noticed something about what these guys were doing. They were all building it out of wood. The accepted wisdom right then was to build it out of spruce or balsa or some other lightweight wood, okay? So they would fly around, and inevitably they would crash, okay? And they would ruin this thing that they spent the time building, and then they would have to rebuild the next one. And so they were doing about 2 test flights a year, because it would take them 6 months to build. So he comes along and he builds the thing out of basically PVC pipe, a few aluminum things on the front, and just some, what do you call this stuff? This, not Kevlar, what do you call it?
Mylar.
Mylar, thank you, Mylar. Mylar, you know, around there, okay? The point was, he could crash this thing, and honestly, he'd get it back and running in a day or 2. He was doing 2 or 3 trials a week. It took him almost 2 years. No, I think it was more like 3 years before he finally got this thing and he won the Creber Prize. Roughly in that time, he did like 130 different trials, 130 different iterations. Now imagine if you're doing 2 a year. It takes a long time, right? Okay? The point is, if you can speed up the speed with which you turn the crank to do iterations and experiments, I think you are going to be more successful. I mean, just the nature of speeding it up is going to help you out. Okay? So, just going back to that, having prototyping tools, having things that help you get through that very rapid prototyping faster, turn the crank faster, okay, helps you get to this level of marketing. Another thing that I think is important in this is, you know, what I call T-shaped people. I think I have a slide on that. Well, actually, I've got a couple other slides first. So this is a little bit about, and this is a slide. What's the guy's name who presented this at the Sprint Zero? Do you remember the guy's name from Minneapolis? No, I can't remember.
John? No, he was, no, I know. Yeah, the agency guy.
Yeah, the agency
that works
guy.
with 3M.
Yeah.
Who is
yeah.
that?
I can't remember. Anyways,
Yeah.
I'll remember his name at some
Von
point.
Miller?
That's it.
Ron
It's
Miller.
spelled, it's
Ron
spelled
Miller.
R-O-H-N.
R-O-H-N, Ron
Yeah,
Miller.
that's
So
it.
Ron Miller presented this in Sprint Zero.
Yeah, that's
And I
right.
thought it was like super smart,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
So he says, and I saw this all the time. You get everybody in a room, all right? And you're having this big meeting about the marketing strategy, right? And you're passing around ideas, some idea rises to the top, and you get this big idea, right? That everybody just kind of hashes out in usually many, many meetings, okay? So you got the big strategy. You do a little bit of user research just to confirm that the idea is good, okay? You never cancel the project at that point. You never do the user research. Cancel the project. You adjust it a little. You design and build it. By the way, that takes a long time, okay? You measure it using those vanity metrics that I talked about because, God damn it, that strategy was cool, you know? And you measure it. And then, you know, if it doesn't work, then you come up with some other new big strategy, right? And somebody gets fired and all that sort of stuff. So what Ron proposed, and he again took some of this from these guys at Made by Many, is forget that. Let's do a little strategy. Let's do almost the first thing that instinctively comes to mind, okay? Let's plan, design, launch, and measure this as quick as we can. Get some insights. Figure out, you know, the learning curve for that for another little strategy. Adjust that, do it again. And by the way, do 4 or 5 of those in the time that it took us to do one of those. Okay? And so all this is happening here. There's one other important thing that happens here, is A or B. A is continue. If you continue to do this iteration and it continues to work, fine. But sometimes you iterate, and you say, you know what, this really is just not working. And so what he would say is you then do something again that comes from the Lean, Eric Ries, and the Lean Startup, and that is called a pivot. It's a totally different thing. You're not just iterating on the same little strategy and learning. You're actually doing something quite different. Okay. How many of you seen the video that CocaCola put out a couple years ago called Content 2020? A lot of people have seen that. Okay? You should watch it. It's interesting, okay? A lot of jargon, a lot of stuff in there, some of which I think is kind of hokey. But I found this particular thing pretty valuable. What Coke said in terms of their investments, their content strategy, and what they were going to do, is that they were going to put about 70% of their budget and money budget and 50% of their time into the bread and butter things that pay the rent that they know work. And these are things that are going to be done broadly, okay? And broadly for Coke means, you know, worldwide, okay, across all their audiences. So that's 70% of their budget, 50% of their time. The next 20% of their money and 25% of their time was going to be done on iterating on what works, okay? So they were going to, you know, change a few things about what they know works and see if they could improve it, right? Iterate on the things that work. Still with broad scale, not a whole lot of risk there, all that sort of stuff. The last 10% of their budget and a full 25% of their time, they put into projects that they specifically described as high-risk projects. Generally, they did not do them at scale. They would do them in narrow markets. Brazil was one of their favorite markets for whatever reason, okay? And they would do things just at that level. The idea was that these things at the 10% introduced the brand new ideas that became tomorrow's 20 or 70%. So I think one of the things that happens in this is you start to think about a budget of your money and time where you're doing this experimentation. And not all of it is just simple iteration. Some of it is, let's go out and do some wild and crazy things. I told this story already. Okay, so this is one I want to talk about, the T-shaped people. So this is a quote from a guy named Brad Terrell, again, in Scott Brinker's blog, all right? T-shaped people are traditionally people who are deep in one particular subject, but who are broad across a number of different things. And I increasingly, as I have been hiring new marketing people, I am looking for T-shaped people. And I look for it very specifically. Like, let me tell you a couple things that I look for. Number one, you've got to have a basic understanding of technology. And you'd be surprised how many marketing people do not, okay? And I interview for that. I actively look for that. Number two, you've got to be able to write. I'm a little bit of a snob about that, okay? If you can't show me a blog post that you've done in the last 6 months and I can look at it and it's your work and it's well written, I don't want you as a marketer. Everybody has to write, okay? And I have a couple other things that I look for, but I'm looking for sort of that broad knowledge. I don't care what particular area that they're expertise in. I want people who have that broad knowledge. Even if they're the best SEO person in the world, I want them to be able to write, for example. Okay? Because I think it's important to do that. All right, level 4, agility and speed. All right, so this is the one where I really think it's not so much about just getting things done, but it's responding to change and being able to make real-time decisions. And to me, a lot of this comes about from management, where management is organizing teams in small collaborative teams and giving them permission to fail. And people are doing things that they don't feel have to be perfect, they can be good enough, okay? You guys remember this ad, right? All right, so this is almost a year ago, it was last year's Super Bowl. More important than the ad and its impact in terms of how many people saw it on Twitter and all that sort of thing is the lessons learned from how this got executed. The important thing is, how long were the lights out? Do you guys remember?
30 minutes.
About 30 minutes, that's right. Okay? They conceived of, executed, got permission, all that sort of stuff in 30 minutes. And the reason that they were able to do that is because they had everybody, marketers, agency, everybody sitting together in a single room. They had everybody around a single table. I'd ask you, how many of your marketing organizations can you make a decision in 30 minutes to do something like this, okay? In order to do that, you've got to have teams, small collaborative teams, and almost they have to be given permission to make these decisions. And they also have to be given permission to fail. Anybody know who this is? Got a young picture of him. Ted Williams, right? What's the significance of the 344?
Career batting.
It's a lifetime batting average, okay? Look, in baseball you fail 6 times out of 10 and you're incredible, okay? You're the best hitter ever, all right? And this is real. One of my board members works at Amazon. He went in, his company got acquired about a year ago, and so he's just had his first year review at Amazon. And his boss said to him, okay, you did 3 big things this year, and 2 of them worked really well, and 1 of them failed. What Michael was expecting to hear is all about the one that failed. How often does that happen? It happens a lot, right? Instead, his boss said to him, that's an incredible average. In fact, it's so high, you're probably not taking enough chances. Keep doing what you're doing, but take more chances. That's what he told him at Amazon, okay? This is the whole thing about how we manage our teams. It's okay to fail. And if your batting average is 500, that's not a bad batting average to get some of this stuff done. Yeah? Question?
So I think this is great what you're laying out, and I love it. A lot of it seems like a prescription for digital marketing. I mean, digital marketing is fast, it iterates, it doesn't go with one big idea, it goes with hundreds of small ideas and sees which one works, as opposed to old media, CocaCola, worldwide TV ads and things of that sort. So I think digital marketers think this way.
Yeah, sometimes. Let me get to something in the last part of what I'm going to do, which is the remarkable customer experiences. Because to me, I think it's more than digital marketing, all right? The e-consultancy guy would disagree with me. He talks about it all being digital marketing. That's his background. It doesn't happen to be my background. I've done some digital marketing, but that's not my primary background. And I think it's broader than that. I think you can do it with all kinds of marketing, including even traditional TV ads. I think there are ways to do that. I think it does apply a little better in the digital world we have today because it's so much more measurable. But I think it's broader than that. But after I've gotten to the end, tell me if you think it's still just digital.
I'm not saying it's exclusive to it, but I'm saying that is very much at the heart of how good digital marketing works.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. All right, so level 5. To me, the key thing about level 5 is this whole idea of creating remarkable customer experiences and what I call outcomes, okay? And I'll explain that in just a minute, all right? And it's a number of different things. There's some working practices. I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll talk about PieShaped People and a few things down in this. So let me just kind of dive down into those. First is I want to talk about this idea of creating a remarkable customer experience. And I'm going to start off with a B2C example, and then I'm going to show a B2B example in this. So 2008, we're starting into the depths of the recession. And one of the first things that goes in terms of spending when people are, laid off, or they're worried just about the economy or those kinds of things, are things like expensive ski vacations. And the guys at Vail Ski Resort were very concerned about the future, and they were already starting to see some decline in terms of the number of people who were scheduling future vacations. Working with the marketing department, the CEO actually led this effort. They did something they called Epic Mix, okay? And the idea behind Epic Mix was they embedded an RFID tag in your ski tag. What do they call it? I don't ski. Ski pass, thank you. Ski pass, okay? The idea was that, number one, they could track which of the various courses you went on, how many vertical feet you skied every day. They also sent photographers out, on the ski slopes, and the photographers would take your picture, and then instead of asking your name or get you to sign something, they just scan that little RFID tag, and instantly the pictures would appear up on your particular, Facebook-like page. Okay. They also used some things from gaming, where you could get pins and you could earn certain levels. They had leaderboards. I don't see it on here, but they had leaderboards to do all this stuff. All right. It's a total different experience. What they noticed is that when people go skiing, it's not just the time on the slopes. It's also the time in the lodge bragging about, I did 6 runs down the Black Diamond Moguls or whatever, and I did, this many vertical feet and blah, 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 all that bragging. And then it was also sharing the experience with friends and family afterwards. Okay? So they realized that was part of the experience, and they created this thing that was all around that sort of experience and improving it. Okay? This was a remarkable customer experience. And by the way, I'm using remarkable in both the sense that it was great, incredible, but also in the sense that people went back and remarked upon it to others. It was, I can't remember who talks about this, but anyways, it's remarked upon, okay, in that sense as well.
Seth Godin.
Yeah.
Seth Godin, that's the guy's name I was trying to remember, thank you. I'm so bad with names tonight. Can you tell I didn't sleep last night? So, 3 hours. Here's a B to B example. Anybody know Expensify? I love them, okay? I mean, we use them. And I think they do a really good job of expense reports that don't suck. That is truth, I mean, that's their tagline, and honestly, they do a good job on it, okay? Their expense reports are relatively easy to fill out. It's a pretty complete experience. From the first moment that you sign up, to how you fill out the expense reports, to how you approve them, all that sort of stuff. They've really thought through the experience. little small touch. Every time I go to approve an expense report, I see a different little picture. I know it's silly, but I'm always curious as to what picture is going to come up next. Because they're always interesting. It's just a silly little thing, but it's a nice touch. It keeps me engaged with their product. This is kind of a simple thing, but I see so much bad marketing that doesn't do this. Anybody ever got taught that you should talk about benefits, not features? That's how I got taught, when I was a sales guy learning sales in the early 80s. Everybody said, don't talk about your features, talk about your benefits. It's true as far as it goes. It ends up being a lot of bad marketing because here's what happens, okay? You say, here we have this feature, and the benefit to you is blah, 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 okay? It's very different from what the best marketers do. They focus on outcomes. And let me explain the difference between outcomes and benefits with this slide. So imagine this scenario, and this is at a Nordstrom department store, okay? The woman on the right is trying on a coat. The woman on the left is the Nordstrom saleswoman. What is the woman on the left saying to the woman on the right? Some of you women speak up.
That looks great on you.
That looks great on you, exactly. What else might they say?
I have the same one.
They're not going to say that. They're not going to say that, okay? They might also say your husband or your boyfriend or whatever is going to love this one, right? That's what it's flattering. It's about the outcome. What she's not going to say is, this is 100% wool, and so it'll keep you warm in the winter. She's not going to say, these buttons are, double knotted, and so they're not going to fall off. But as tech marketers in particular, we do that way too much. We talk about the feature and then the benefit. That's not what the Nordstrom sales lady talks about. She talks about the outcome. And the outcomes sometimes have nothing to do with your product, but it's why people buy your product. So it's part of it is I'm saying focus on these remarkable customer experiences and outcomes, not benefits. My little thing from today. PieShaped people. I talked earlier about Tshaped people. I also think being pie-shaped is a kind of a riff on that. Again, from the e-consultancy guy. The difference is pie-shaped people are not only they have this generalist broad knowledge and they're deep in some areas, but they're deep particularly in some left brain or some right brain things. And I want to actually show you exactly what he says here. So let me go to the browser here. Okay. So it's a different, let's see. Here it is. I'm going to highlight it. Okay, so what he says is, these marketers are broad-based knowledge in all areas, but capabilities in both left and right brain disciplines. They are both analytical and data-driven, yet they understand brands, storytelling, and experiential marketing. Okay? And I think it's that contrast. It's not only about being analytical and data-driven, but they also understand brands, storytelling, and the experiential marketing. So that's the thing you're looking for. That's the kind of left brain, right brain sort of thing. Oops. It started out in number 1. How do we get back there? Sorry about that. The last thing I want to talk about a little bit is what are some of the implications of this for how you organize your Agile marketing team, how you organize your marketing team. So, certainly, this is a way in which I had things organized when I was at Microsoft. Okay, we had traditional departments. Okay, we had PR, we had advertising, we had product management, which is sort of research and strategy. Later on, we did have interactive, digital, that sort of thing. Very traditional design, in terms of departments. I understand you had the guys from HubSpot here a few months ago, okay? And I saw that this was a way that they used to organize. I understand that they've changed things since. But I thought this was kind of interesting, the way that they did it, which is designing things around particular goals in the sense that you want to accomplish, right? So it's brand and buzz, objectives, achieving brand awareness, top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, evangelism, and marketeering, okay? And then they have particular measurements, for each one. Well, I've kind of riffed off of that a little bit, and in terms of how we organize, our marketing and some of the things that I've talked to people about. One of the things that I think is really important is to create a chief customer experience officer. You need to put somebody in charge of that customer experience. Much like in Agile development, there is a product owner, right, who makes those decisions. I think the chief customer experience officer has to think about that and think about everything, the complete experience that the customer has from the first moment that they hear about your company to the moment that they are using your product and renewing and all throughout the entire life cycle. So we put somebody in charge of it, okay? Andrew is our chief customer experience officer. You may have other people underneath him, we just have one guy right now. I do think brand and buzz is super important. I'm myself not very good at this, okay? But I have hired over the years some people who just seem to be magical at this. They get the attention. And they have a particular skill set for doing that. Lead generation and your marketing automation systems and all that, I think, is a critical function. Next, at least for B2B, which I've done all my career, you need some kind of care and feeding in the sales force. I think that's a total separate function. And then lastly is this idea of marketeering or marketing technologist. People who are going to build the systems that allow you to iterate fast, get the data you need, get the kind of data that you need to make a difference, and so forth.
So, before you switch, so one of the things that I went to work for small companies and startups, the lead generation and the care and feeding of the sales team is the same function, or at least tries to be. Generally smaller organizations, but I would argue that they shouldn't be separate. I mean, ultimately, lead generation, if it's not providing what sales wants or what they actually need, isn't as useful versus, well, we need a data sheet, or sales. We want a lot of leads. Well, no, we want the CFOs. That's the answer you get. So, I mean, I'm just devil's advocate.
No, it's fine. And I don't know that I tend to focus these people on generating sales qualified leads, right? And they get a definition with sales as to what sales qualified leads are, and that's their metric, and they are just razor focused on it, okay? You could argue that these people don't really need to exist because they don't really need to produce the data sheets and all that sort of stuff. I've tried that. Boy, the Salesforce whines something fierce whenever I won't get them printed data sheets, okay? And so I've kind of given up and said, because I don't know why I hate printed data sheets, but they all insist that they have to have them. And I must admit, I've gone on sales calls with them, and not all the time, but a fairly reasonable amount of the time, the customer says, well, can you send me, something on that? They want a printed thing on that. And it's the customer expectation as much as possible. So I don't know that I have an argument against what you're saying. It's just I do this out of practicality of somebody has to sit there and keep the sales force happy with the things that they think they need.
Yeah, but that's sales enablement though, you're talking the Karen feeding, so it's getting the right intelligence, the right.
Well, that too.
Yeah.
That also is a big part of it too, is competitive intelligence and, you know, just the other things they know. Salesforce, we have some, the person there is working on Salesforce.
Asking the right questions.
Asking the right questions, you know, those kinds of things. So,
Competency driven.
yeah.
It's a different set of competencies.
It tends to be.
I actually think that the customer experience box that you have at the beginning is the most interesting one, and I think it's the one that's probably most often forgotten by companies.
Yeah.
Partly because a marketer, what do they do? Well, if it's a promotional marketer, they might focus more on lead generation and Karen feeding the sales force rather than necessarily thinking about customer experiences. So their focus is on another area because that's what the management is directing them to do. And then you have product marketers who are not necessarily thinking about whole experience, although they often do, but they might build the product and they might facilitate some aspects of it, but they might not do everything. So I think there's almost a gap at that end that's actually the most important thing. Actually, it's really the CEO who should be sort of responsible for that.
And so here's the thing that at least I find.
Yeah.
As CEO, I'm running a mile a minute, okay? And I'm trying to please the board, and I'm trying to raise money, and I'm going along on sales calls, and I'm doing a bunch of stuff, okay? And I do spend some of my time on this, but if I don't have somebody who's really focused on this as their day-to-day job, it kind of gets lost a little bit. I throw ideas at this guy all the time, okay? Andrew sits right across the hall from me, and I'm talking to him all the time about that when I can, but he ultimately owns it and drives it and makes some things happen. And at least in my experience, I've found that I can't do that full time. I need somebody who's going to own that and get it done and push for it and get down into the detail. And all that
Maybe
sort of
it's
stuff.
not the ownership, but it's more the understanding of the importance of it. So
No, it's always the ownership. It's always accountability. Somebody isn't accountable for it.
Doesn't
Doesn't
get
exist.
done.
Well, no, I agree with that, but I mean, I see your point on.
Well, part of the other thing is, he has to be there because the product development team comes to him all the time, asking about stuff.
Why does he sit within marketing? Why not direct report to the CEO?
He is a direct report to the CEO, but I consider him in marketing. I don't care whether you call him in marketing or not. In our particular case, he is a direct report to me.
But to me, that's what marketing is all about, the customer experiences, which is ironic to me because I think most companies don't actually understand that. We miss it, we don't. So for your company, I think is probably has a better chance of making it because you've actually got that and you're actually thinking about it and you've got someone dedicated.
Yeah, but we gotta do this too.
Right, yeah.
You know, I mean, this is tomorrow's product, this is paying the bills.
But the other thing, those customer experiences actually, if you do it in the right way, may actually lead to lead generation.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But you still gotta do a lot of it. stuff. Did I see another hand over here? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what authority, some companies are starting to have a chief customer officer or chief customer experience officer.
Yeah.
Not a lot yet, but then there's a question of, does that person have any authority over product design, over marketing? But I would argue that they need that does have to be part of the sales experience too. The sales experience has a lot to do with the success of sales and everything that you do. So, if you were drawing a chart, is it right under the CEO and over a lot of people, or is this another silo, or where does the authority go?
It's not very hierarchical, honestly. I mean, it's, I still have a VP of sales or senior VP of sales who he's responsible for the number, okay? But yet, the customer experience person is thinking about what are the salespeople telling the customers and making sure that the salespeople don't sell things that we don't have, don't sell an experience that we can't deliver on, or, some examples are kind of simple, but, so we do video, we do video remote interpreting, right? And we do it using the wireless network of an existing hospital. Well, that's a huge dependency because hospitals, if you know anything about hospital IT, they're usually 10 years behind the times. And so, I mean, we'll go into big hospitals where they have, 2 or 3 megabits of bandwidth, okay? And that's for everything, and that's just not enough for us to do more than 1 or 2 sessions, okay? And so, one of the things we had to learn early on, this is something that happened last year, was that we needed to walk the customer through this network assessment in order that they wouldn't have a bad experience when we delivered the carts, okay? And the sales guys, they wanted to sell to everybody. We gave them the power, the guys who do the network assessment, to say, no, you can't sell it to those guys because they will have such a bad experience that they'll tell everybody else, you cannot sell it to them. So at some point, yes, you do have to have backing of the CEO or whatever to do some of these things, okay? But it's not a hierarchical, sales doesn't report to this person, at least in my experience.
I've actually seen some of the larger B2B tech companies have a chief customer officer or something similar, having sales, head of marketing, head of services, and then if it's in place, head of channels report into there, and then directly up into the CEO there. I mean, I don't know how well that's working or what else is in place.
Yeah, I've always kind of never heard anyone say this, but I've kind of talked about the idea that the relative importance of marketing is kind of inversely proportional to the price of your product. So, when you have the companies that are selling enterprise products, the high price tag, these models of marketing kind of organizing as they want, not being beholden to others, have more strength versus companies where, you're selling $500,000, $1 million products, the sales teams of those top reps of the stars and end up being really disruptive. Have you ever seen, does that make any sense in terms of?
So I'll weigh in for you.
I don't know.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's come out in last year about because of the internet and because of inbound marketing. I want to say, is it 60%? Serious, threw out a number, like 60% of the process has gone the customer directly through your content or through third-party referrals before they even engage a salesperson. So even for a big ticket item, marketing's influence has increased.
Well, I was thinking more organizational dynamics, right? I mean, we can build the models we want if the sales rep, I think of, Dave, you could talk about EMC, right? I mean,
I'm feeling very, I know one of those companies.
I mean,
And to your point, Frank, I would argue that the larger the company, and that's my only experience, truthfully, is that the less bang that marketing has, or less power that they have. And in fact, there are other battles to fight to get to some of the places that Jim's talking about here. I'm thinking through some of them, like, but the engineering crowd and the sales crowd is so powerful and dictates some of the things that happen that marketing sometimes flows to what that is instead of what I think of as the natural course of action, which should be marketing should flow down into sales and they listen and they take it from there.
I'd say it's a result of you being a tech company too.
Right.
I know, it's the
The
technology, right?
Again, my only experience.
Well, and the culture of EMC, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's always been
EMC.
that.
It's not that unique, though, tech
No.
companies.
No, it is,
companies
but
that-
I mean, look at Apple. I mean, at the heart, Apple's a marketing company, right? And they do, a lot of this stuff. Coke, Coke is marketing, that's what they do. And I mean, there are examples of big companies where marketing does play a huge role. But I do think in tech, that's not common, okay?
It tends to come from where did they come from, the company from its
Yes.
initial being.
Yes.
And that if it was 4 techie guys sat in a garage somewhere and built something, and they got 10 other techie guys and 3 of them started to sell, that's how it came up, and others start from a marketing background.
It's true.
Yeah,
Culture.
it does. All right. I did a summary eye chart of everything that I showed before, but I thought there's no way you guys are going to be able to see that. So I thought I'd just touch on a few things, okay? So if you hear one thing from me, and Scott has preached this gospel, it is to focus on remarkable customer experiences. I genuinely think it's one of the biggest changes we could make as marketers is to start focusing on those remarkable customer experiences and the outcomes as well. Okay? The second thing is, I think fewer metrics are better than more metrics, and I think the best metrics are actionable, ones that you can take action on. So select a few of those. Third, invest in experimentation. Ask yourself, are you genuinely spending 30% of your budget and 50% of your time on experimentation? I can't say we are yet at that point, okay? Think about and look at it and say, what have you done to invest in experimentation? And I don't just mean go out there and do experiments, it's also build a culture and build an infrastructure that allows you to do those experiments. 4, figure out how to turn the crank faster. And I meant to put a slide in about this, I didn't, about minimum viable products. Are you familiar with this concept from Lean startup? The idea, a minimum viable product is important. It's not a minimal product, okay? It's the minimum that you need to test something. It's an important distinction, okay? You can have a very sophisticated product, but you make the minimal change that you need in order to test it. Hire T-shaped and PieShaped people. I think I talked about that. Create these small cross-functional teams. People are talking to me about who do they report to, all of that. Some of the best marketing organizations that I've seen lately, it's really unclear who reports to whom, and it changes. I mean, I've seen where they organize by project, and here's who's on this project, and boom, you got another project, and it's different. And there isn't very much of a hierarchical structure in some of those organizations. It's not easy to do. It doesn't get done often, but I think it's worth looking into. Push down the decision making. I try to do this as much as I can because I knew what it was like to be a middle manager and have, Steve Ballmer make all the decisions. I remember how much that frustrated me. Give teams permission to fail. And this is my example from the Amazon guy. If somebody's batting average is 500, celebrate that. Okay. Automate what you can. Turn data into competitive advantage. I also meant to add some slides about this. Anybody read the things about Obama's data team? I don't care about your politics, but they put together an amazing data team, and it became a competitive advantage for the Democrats. Think about how that applies to your business. And then, lastly, adopting new technology for competitive advantage. The guy who adopted the RID, technology at Epic Mix, okay? That's a great example. Don't just adopt technology for technology's sake. It's got to be some form of